Welcome, everyone, to Career Accelerator's LinkedIn Live event on navigating the transition from an individual contributor to a manager. My name is Aakash Mandhar, and I'll be performing double duty as the host and a panelist today. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of navigating the transition, let me introduce my fantastic co-panelists. First up, we have Gautham Palappa. Gautham is the founder of Transformity and an executive advisor at VMware. He has a PhD in computer science and is an award-winning author who helps leaders lead with empathy and aims to transform humanity through empathy and technology. Next up, we have Subramanian Murli, aka Subram, aka Subbu. Subram is the Vice President for Marketing Technologies at Fidelity Investments and is a technology leader with experience leading large organizations and high-performing teams. Previously, he oversaw the development and migration of a new mail platform for over 1.2 billion users at Yahoo. Last but certainly not the least, myself. I am currently working on building the future of digital ownership in games as a Vice President of Studio Engineering at Immutable. Previously, I led the creation of a virtual economy platform at EA that, among other things, powered Apex Legends, the fastest growing battle royale game, which grew from 0 to 50 million players in 4 weeks. I'm also an angel investor, startup advisor, career coach, and a content creator. My passions include solving complex problems with a team, driving business outcomes, and value creation for all. I know that many of you are probably wondering what makes us qualified to talk about the topic. Well, let me tell you, we've been there. We've all made the transition from individual contributor to manager and lived to tell the tale. And let me know you, it wasn't very easy. But we learned a lot along the way, and now we're here to share our experiences and insights with you. Whether you're just starting to think about making the transition or you're already knee-deep in it, we've got something for you. So buckle up, grab a cup of coffee, and get ready to navigate this exciting, yet sometimes bumpy journey with us. We're here to help you succeed and make the most of this transition. But before we jump in, we should get both of you to introduce yourself in your own words. So Gautham, why don't you go first?
Yeah, thanks, Aakash. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this powerful discussion. I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to be vulnerable and share my experiences, failures, and learnings. I actually started off in academia, so it's a different tack for me. And I spent over 6 years teaching undergrads and graduate students, performing research, focusing on smart homes and assisted healthcare. And then I switched to the industry and I've worked several verticals. I have over 20 years of experience and I've had several roles as a technical IC, as a manager, and as an executive. I've been very fortunate to have led global engineering and operations teams, and I've been accountable for several mission-critical applications such as Enhanced 911 for North America, disaster recovery, healthcare provider networks, conferencing and collaboration for large events and analyst calls, media outlets, and school notification, and so on. Currently, I'm an executive advisor at VMware, where I work with C-suite and executives on their business and organization transformation goals. I'm also the founder of Transformity, as Aakash mentioned, and I'm an engineer by heart. And I joined management to bring a voice to the developers and engineers. My motto is transform with empathy, and I'm very passionate about empathic leadership, lean experimentation, agility, and DevOps, and helping organizations evolve with these core skills. I'm based out of San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm looking forward to this exciting discussion that we're going to have today and the insights that will be shared.
Oh, thank you, Gautham. Over to you, Subram.
Hey, thanks, Aakash. Thanks, Gautham. I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. Like Aakash was mentioning, definitely something that we've all made a transition to from being an individual contributor to a manager. It's definitely an area of interest for me. I have part of LinkedIn on in my own professional career. I have coached a lot of new managers who make that transition purely by telling stories about successes and failures on my own experiences and all of it. And incidentally, me and Aakash also had a similar conversation where in his Fairy Tale show, where we talked about failures and not recognizing the opportunity and the privilege that it is to actually manage people to deliver outcomes. I also am in engineering and been in engineering all my life, so this is a good merger between how you can actually be a technology people leader as well as a people leader, because it is applicable to many fields, and I'm excited for today's conversation.
Thank you, Subram. So let's kick off with an overview of the topic, and then we'll get into stories from each of our panelists. So if you're ready to take your career to the next step and become a manager, you're in the right place. Like, it can be a daunting task, but with the right tools and guidance, I think you can make a really smooth transition. So in this session, we'll cover all the key considerations for making the move from an IC to a manager, from understanding your new roles and responsibilities to developing your leadership skills and managing your team. Plus, we'll provide practical tips and strategies for navigating the challenges and pitfalls that come with this role. So if you're ready to take the leap and become a successful manager, let's get started. In true career accelerator fashion, we did a deep dive on the aspirations that people have with this transition. And here's what we uncovered. They want to be more influential. Many ICs aspire to become people managers because they want to have greater impact in the organization and want to be able to shape its direction and strategy. They want to lead and develop a team. They become managers and are motivated by the opportunity to lead and develop a team of people to advance their careers. They want to learn new skills, and they also want to achieve a better work-life balance. Some ICs may aspire to become managers because they believe that the role will allow them to achieve a better work-life balance. While this is not always the case, many managers are able to delegate to their team and have better control over the schedules. In my transition personally from an IC to manager, the number of meetings went through the roof. So I would do my manager work and then I would go do my IC work. It gets pretty chaotic, but if you're willing to put in the effort, you can achieve a pretty good work-life balance. Here are some of the frustrations that people experience while doing this transition also, because we have to balance aspirations with frustrations too. Managing former peers. This is one of the most common frustrations for new manager, as people who were peers with you are now your reports. So changing of the dynamic of the relationship can get pretty challenging. Increased workload and responsibilities. The transition from IC to manager often involves taking on additional responsibilities and greater workloads and building muscle that you may not have exercised in the past. This can be overwhelming, it can be frustrating, and people are not always prepared to step up to the demands of the role. You need to learn new skills, and you need to learn them fast. You need to be really good at dealing with conflict, because conflict will happen. You're dealing with people. At least in the IT industry, we used to deal a lot more with code. Code was simpler. There's very, very less conflict. People are all unique. So you need to build up your muscle on how to deal with conflict. And then also finding the balance between being a manager and IC. Many new managers struggle with finding the balance because they were really good IC. So they have a hard time letting go and letting their team thrive. So finding the right balance of how much you should jump in versus how much you should coach is a constant source of frustration in the early part of being a manager. So with that, I want to kick it over to you, Gautham, to share some personal experiences and lessons learned during the transition from an IC to a manager.
Yeah, sure. And as you were talking about the findings and the insights from the Career Accelerator Forum, what I started feeling was just PTSD, so to speak, and going back and reliving some of the epic fails that I've had in my life. So I'm here to share two stories and emphasize a couple of points out here. So early on in my career, in one of the companies, I observed that there was not much representation of dev and technical folks in our management. So I decided to throw my hat in the ring and promote techno management in the organization. And I feel I was lucky to be promoted to a manager role and get a seat at the table, so to speak. It was an excited time. So I was wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I felt that I was given an opportunity to improve how we did things out there. I had a laundry list of all the things. I mean, it was massive. That as an IC, we felt that it was painful or it was inefficient, and we could do things better. And so we set out improving processes, optimizing work streams, artifacts, and handoffs. And it was super exciting. And I felt that I had arrived. So being a huge fan of improvement kata, continuous improvement, what I'd done is I'd penciled 20% of the team's time into improvement activities. It was super exciting for me to see how our teams and I were changing the organization and making it a shining example of how a team should be. But unfortunately, the team didn't see that way. They were getting burnt out, they were worn out, and they were tired. There was constant stress to make things better and improve. And so in one of the team meetings, a senior member asked if we could talk about something important. And I've always emphasized radical candor, vulnerability, and transparency in my team. So no topic was off the table. This team member said that they were exhausted with the improvement kata, and they wanted to have a steady state for a while before changing things. And then one team member said that it felt as if there was no process or artifact that was good enough for me. And this shocked me because I was thinking that we were changing the world and we were having so much of fun challenging the status quo and setting examples within the organization. And I never took a step back to consider or reflect upon the fact of how much it was impacting the team. And so after a lot of introspection, what I realized was that I was trying to make too much change too soon. And I was disrupting every process overnight. And that revelation made me embrace a primary belief of mine, that is, strategic disruption, not disruption for the sake of disruption, is what leads to progress. So I have this theory which says that people, when they're in the status quo, they are operating within a comfort zone because they understand and they know what's going on. They're comfortable. They know the familiar, right? Then when you start coming in and start bringing in changes, what happens is they start feeling discomforted. They go into what I call the discomfort zone, and they feel uncomfortable with the change because they have to adapt, they have to learn, they have to do all this. And now if the rate of change is extremely high, people go into what I call as a panic zone. And when they go into the panic zone, they will shut down and they will go back. They will revert back to their comfort zone because that is a familiar. So what I was doing by disrupting almost everything that they knew, I was pushing them into a panic zone. And so I had to scale back. And I had to make them feel in the discomfort zone because that's where really cool things happen. But at the same time, I had to make sure that they were not in panic mode. So that was the first lesson that I learned, is strategic disruption is what leads to progress. And it's not disruption for the sake of disruption. The next thing I learned was around delegation. And Aakash, you touched upon this a little bit, like how much do you give back? When do you jump in? When do you roll your sleeves and actually attack the problem or target the problem? So I had worked on some hairy and highly technical projects before I'd become a manager. And I felt at that time I was young and naive, and I felt that I had the knack to deconstruct these hard problems, and I enjoyed going to the meetings, and I felt that I was providing the air cover for my teams and allowing them to focus on work while I went and I was able to address the problem or attend all these meetings. And like you mentioned, my meeting schedule also went through the roof. And at that time, for some weird reason, I felt proud that I was double and triple booked in my calendar. I felt that it was a badge of honor that I was so wanted, or I was attending all these meetings. And that was a crazy thing that I realized later. But at that time, you think, oh, I'm so much in demand and it's so cool to go and attend these meetings. And since I had the scars and the experience to prove it, I felt that what I was doing was providing accurate estimates for the tasks. What I failed to realize was that I was estimating based on how long I would take to complete the task and not the team. And in effect, what I was doing was creating aggressive deadlines. And this increased the stress levels with the teams. And in addition to this, because I was also missing the action, so to speak, I would assign tasks to myself, justifying that I was a player coach and I was in techno management and I was helping the team by completing some user stories and so on. So code reviews were interesting. I would go deep into details and I would suggest ways to improve them. And not just that, many a times I would jump into the module and rewrite the code to make it better, like during the code review. And my thought at that time was that I was helping the team member by reducing the hassle of opening the project, editing, and rechecking. The code was already open, and I would just make the necessary changes in real time. So here are two things that two mistakes that I was committing, and I do want to stress on the fact that they were mistakes. The first thing is I was not involving the team in estimation and planning. I was assuming that everyone performs at the same level, and so I did not think of taking the team into account. I was thinking that the team was a projection of me rather than me being an extension of the team, and that was a valuable lesson for me. The second thing is I had not learned to delegate tasks appropriately and ensure that the team was completing the task. And instead, I was undermining their hard work and their talent by pointing out their flaws and trying to demonstrate that I was the smartest person in the room during code reviews. I was still trying to be the expert. And I was impacting my team's morale, disregarding their hard work, and overall not really being a good manager. And once I realized this and I reflected upon this, I took conscious steps to make sure that I didn't do this. I started being much more delegatory, providing more tasks to people. I didn't have to always attend every meeting. I could send them to other meetings as needed and so on. And then I started investing more in my team and helping with career progression and so on and so forth. So these are two things that early on in my career that I realized I was doing really, really bad. I thought I was coming from a place of goodness, and I thought I was improving things, but in reality, what I was doing was I was actually hurting the cause rather than helping.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those stories, Gautham. Subram, your turn. Could you share with us the importance of building strong foundations as an IC before becoming a manager, and any other stories that you'd like to add on? You're on mute, by the way. 3 years of COVID and we still say this.
Yeah, we still say that. It's funny. Thanks for the context and the few things that I definitely will take away from what Gautham said and what Aakash, you started off. One common thread that you can weave across each of those experiences is a realization, number one, that it's not about you, the manager, right? It's always about what your role is and what you can enable for the team that you're now responsible for managing. So that realization, speaking from a personal term, came very late. I mean, I could relate very well to what Gautham was saying when it came to like, you suddenly feel more important, and you being plugged into more things became the defining line of you being a good manager, which you realize very quickly stepping into the transition that it is the exact opposite. And to me, going back to the question itself on foundations, a few things that come to mind is before you are a people manager, there is an often missed association that they say leadership and management is kind of the same thing. It isn't. So going back to foundations, I would say, see that if you have those leadership qualities, are you able to speak up for what you believe in? Are you able to establish clearer agendas of what you want to accomplish? Do you feel like you're someone who can communicate your plans, ambitions, goals openly, clearly, articulately? Are you someone who is available for people? Now, this is regardless of whether you're a people manager or an individual contributor leader. These are some foundational elements that become essential and critical before you can choose whether you can be willing to accept the privilege of managing a team. Once you are able to get past that, and because again, even though we start by saying it's not about you, it starts with the first self-realization that you need to grow yourself into those foundational elements for you to then be able to be fully available for your team for each and every problems they might have, right? So when it comes to technology leadership, I think the boundaries are a little bit more merged, in fact, than traditional people management, because in technology, there is very few times that they hire a pure play people manager. You're usually hired in a technology management role because you're good in certain understanding of certain technologies. Either you've been in roles that allows you to look at scale, dealt with intense problems. Either you're an expert in a particular coding language or you're an expert in a particular domain. When it comes to computer science, computer engineering, technology, that line between pure play people manager and an expert is kind of blurred. And that is both a good and a bad thing. The good thing is because you are someone who your peers can respect, can have a confident conversation about the technology problem at hand. But it's also bad because it blurs the lines between what defines your productivity. So when you start off, when you make the transition, it is very hard to absolve yourself of all things technology. You cannot say, I'm a pure play manager, just come to me with people problems. That doesn't happen in technology. You start with, okay, how do I remove myself from critical path? If there is a production release, how am I not the only person who's driving the production release? How do I get my team to own that, right? That becomes a clear stepping stone into how you go broader and broader, because that line is very blurred in technology. If you are in the space that Gautham mentioned, where you're early in your management career and you now have to have a clear idea of what defines your productivity, because on one way you can feel all important that you're in every meeting, but then on the flip side, and this happened to me in my own failure, was I was sitting in a corner thinking, man, I'm not checking in as much code as I used to, or I'm not making as much impact, so let me go do even more of those, right? And one thing I realized very late was, as a manager, if you jump in and solve a problem, especially if you have a junior member in the team, they were not going to challenge you, because there is this weird hierarchy in play. They're not going to challenge you, and you being aware of that is a very important thing. So going back to foundations, I would say the only thing I would remind people making the transition is find ways to remove yourself out of critical path. That would be the number one thing I would say. If you can pay attention during the transition, is the most valuable thing you can do.
Can I add one more thing there? Because Subba, you brought something really, really important. When you were talking about people moving from an IC to a manager role, I would recommend this book. It's by John Maxwell. It's called The 5 Levels of Leadership.
Yeah.
And out there, what we all need to understand is, regardless of what accolades we've done in the past, regardless of all our accomplishments that we've done, either in the current company or the previous company, when you move to a new role, you start at ground zero or level zero, and you have to start building that rapport. And it gets more complicated when you are going to be managing your previous peers. There is going to be a huge power dynamic, political play, all those things. You'll probably have to walk on eggshells for a little bit, and I don't think we even have the time in this discussion to go into all those complexities. But realize that you need to build trust and reputation and your brand, so to speak, when you go into a new role. That is something really fundamental and very important. And the other thing that I really liked about you saying is that it's not about you, it's about us as a team. One of the things that I caught myself early on to do is I kept using the I, because I'm so used as an individual contributor to say I can do this and I will do this. I forgot to, I had to make a conscious decision to and be very purposeful and deliberate in changing the I in my language into we, because now I am representative. I'm just a proxy for the whole team. And while I am managing people, I am only shepherding them to success. That is what my role is. And I can be technical and I can be both a people manager, but at the end of the day, my success is defined by the success of the team, not just my individual thing.
Yeah, it's those subtle things, isn't it? That when it's unless someone points it out or you have your own realization, it's something as simple as that makes a big shift in how you approach the role.
Yeah, there are always like these friction points where you realize, well, something's not really working. Why is this not working? When you introspect is when all of these realizations come in.
Yeah.
So yeah. Do you have anything else to add over there, Subram?
No, I mean, I maybe the path where we probably can take this conversation next is what some of the fears. I mean, we talked a little bit in our own pre-discussion, taking on a role, what some of the fears we face, because a lot of the reactions that people do are in response to their own fears manifesting itself in a larger group dynamic. So maybe it would be an interesting transition point to talk about, at least from each of our personal stories, to see what that looked like.
For sure. Like we can definitely jump into that. Before that, I had some tips from my side that I would like to share. Tips in the form of stories that I have gone through. So you know that this is something that I've dealt with and then figured out a way. So first thing, as a manager, new or existing, it's always very important to set clear goals and expectations. I think as Gautham was saying, it's not the volume of things that you have on your plate and you're trying to do all of these changes. You have to be very strategic with your change. You have to be very strategic with your message, that even if you're not in the room, the team always knows exactly what is the priority and what are we working towards. This is where alignment comes from, because you then want to also give autonomy to your team. So the example was when I joined the Halo team, we had a bad test pass rate. We had very high bug count. So for the first week or so, I observed everything. And then we came up with this thing called high bug count needs to be addressed and the low test pass rate needs to be addressed. So priorities were live site, which is anything happening in production is number one priority. We always want to make sure test passes were at 100%, our bugs were under control. And if we do all of these things by keeping a high bar, then we get to work on features. The culture prior was we keep working on features and we ignore these things because these are not as fun. Once that culture was set, the team was able to achieve like really high test pass rates, really low bug counts, and continue to do that without me having to say anything. The aha moment is really when the team members start saying the same thing to each other. Is like, oh, why is our test pass rate low? Why are our bug counts low? What can we do to make this happen? And then a continuation of that was I moved to EA at one point. One of the ex-team members from the Halo team came over and he was like, oh, why are bug counts so high? Why are test pass rates so low? So that mindset gets stuck with people and then it starts cross-pollinating. So your job as a manager is to make sure you set clear goals and expectations and frameworks by which people can operate more independently without having to rely on you. You don't want to be the bottleneck. You want to be the scaling function. The next point I want to talk about is it's very important to build trust and rapport, right? You have to get things done, but trust trumps everything. And you have to have trust with your team members, with your partners, customers, peers, all of them. And trust has to be earned. Trust is not given. So over time, you need to have a consistent behavior. You need to talk openly and honestly with your customers and partners of what can be done and what cannot be done. Do not drag people along. Do not try to bite off more than what you can chew. Because we just sign up for things and a team is like, well, we can't really deliver. That's also a trust problem. So always be in the no. And do not overcommit and underdeliver. That's a very easy way of losing trust because people are depending on you and your team to get things done. And never ever say one thing and do another. I'll give you an example. Like the whole Apex thing that we said, we went from 0 to 50 million players in like 4 weeks. And that was the marketplace platform. That was the virtual economy that we built in the game. Apex then wanted to go adopt our social platform, which had cross-platform presence, messaging, game invites. As cross-platform gaming became a thing where you could be on an Xbox and play with a PlayStation or a PC and so on. So I was at the airport and I got a call from the head of technology for Apex, whom we had very good relationship with. And he just told me, he's like, the team is really frustrated. Things aren't going well with the social team because XYZ, and we need to go figure out what's happening. If there was no existing trust, they would have just ghosted us. They would have completely dropped the product. It would have been an escalation. Instead, I get a call and I get a chance to go address the issues. And that only happens when you have trust built. So build trust, build all of these bridges, because you want to make sure your team is represented well and have a chance to fix things when they're not going properly. So it turned out the issue over there was a communication issue. We hadn't done a good job of presenting exactly what the capabilities were and how things could work, which then goes to one of the other tips that I'll go share. The next tip is delegating your tasks effectively. So your job as a manager is basically to work yourself out of a job. It doesn't mean you don't have to work. It basically means you go pave the foundation and then hand over those big responsibilities to your team. It gives them a chance to grow also. So when we first built a virtual economy platform at Electronic Arts, there was a lot of traveling to customer sites, working with them constantly, trying to figure out exactly what we're building, why we're building it. But then I started becoming a bottleneck. So we ended up introducing a model called the liaison model within my teams, where we gave engineers the responsibility of directly interacting with the customers to understand their pain points. So the outcome of that was previously it was me working with the customers, trying to figure out what's going on, and then bringing it back to the team, and the team asking me the same questions, and then I'm trying to represent the customers. So I basically short circuit the whole process, and I had different engineers assigned for different teams. So now the engineering team and the product team knew way before what the customer asks were going to be and what the next quarter's plan is going to be. So I was able to effectively scale myself, right? So this is where you start delegating things. And then we ended up giving liaisons to also the Apex team to go to the social work. They already had one for Marketplace. And then the integration became really smooth because every time they had a problem, they had an engineer that they could immediately talk to and the miscommunications were addressed. So think about stuff like that. How can you scale yourself and give your team an opportunity? Don't give them tasks that you would not do, okay? You should eliminate those tasks. If you're not going to do something, don't give it to your team. That's not delegation. And don't give stuff to your team and never follow up on that, right? Delegation is, again, not abdication. So delegation is give something meaningful to the team where they can learn and grow, and you can follow up to make sure that we're making good progress on it. Customer success is pretty important, and we were able to delegate that to the team. Whereas a lot of managers would try to just hoard it for themselves. They're like, oh my God, I don't know if this is going to go well or not. Next thing, offer feedback and support. Like providing constructive feedback and support to your team is very, very important. You don't have to like always make things sound positive because the people are going to get offended. Like everybody wants to grow, right? Everyone wants to improve and everyone has things that they can improve on. So even if your rock star performer is doing really good, think long and hard. There's still things that they can improve on and they can do better, right? Find those and work with them. And for people who are not doing very well, again, don't be overly critical. There are things that they're doing good. There's no absolute goods and bads. There's always a spectrum. So as a manager, you have to go from, at least for me, it was like I was very binary. Things work or things don't work in computer science. So it was like, oh, things are either good or things are bad, but they're always on a spectrum. Find the good, find the areas of development, and give feedback which is holistic. Don't make it one-sided. Next one is you have to foster a positive team culture, right? Creating a supportive environment for everybody is extremely important, right? Aligned autonomy is very important. Number one reason why people leave is because of their managers, right? And that usually happens for one of four reasons. Either they don't have good relationships in the team, like the team dynamics are not very good. So your job as a manager is to make sure like things are good, cohesive, and all of that. So if there is a really high performing jerk on your team, for lack of a better word, you need to figure out a way to correct their behavior or to manage them out, because that really ruins the relationships in the team and it's going to bring people down. Second one is autonomy. I think we touched upon that, like we were trying to jump in and try to solve things for people. You don't want to be doing that. People want to have autonomy to go do things the way they want. As long as you're aligned on what needs to be achieved, you need to give them the space to go do it the way they want to do it. Because again, as Gautham said, Gautham was estimating based on what he would do, but Gautham's not doing the work. Like the people who are doing the work need to have a say in it, and they need to be the ones providing the estimate. The third thing is mastery, right? They have to be learning and grow, and getting better at something. Like the skill has to be developing. You want them to constantly pick up new things, like the customer liaison stuff or whatever, when they start reaching the limits of what they can master in a certain area. Because this is where boredom comes in. Nobody wants to do the same thing over and over and over for years. So keep getting them new things that they can continue to master. And the last thing is purpose. If they don't believe in what you're doing, they're not going to be engaged. They are going to leave, right? I, for example, love the video game industry. There's another gaming industry, which is the casinos and gambling and stuff. I would have a hard time going over there. It's legal. Everything is all good. I have no objections with the industry per se, but it would be hard for me to align myself with the purpose over there. So it's very important to foster a good team culture and make sure everybody on the team is part of this culture. Okay, so handling conflicts and performance issues. First of all, it's really, really hard to hire people. One of your jobs is going to be to hire people. So focus on reforming people who are not performing at their best first. Have open and honest discussions with them. Provide actionable feedback and set mutually agreed upon deadlines. Like, hey, here's a problem, here's what we need to work on, and so on. In the worst case, if they don't improve, most of the people improve, then you have to figure out a way to part ways. Because if you don't part ways and just drag it along because they were a friend or they have been on the team for very long or whatever, your other good performers are going to leave. Because the team sees things. The team is like, well, this person is not really pulling their weight, the manager really isn't doing anything, or this person isn't behaving properly, the manager isn't doing anything. You don't want your A players to be leaving because you did not step up and address the conflicts and performance issues in a timely manner. Next thing, as a manager, you have to be ready to make the tough decisions, right? There's no way around it. This is your new reality. You have to be balanced and you have to be unbiased. You cannot do favoritism. You cannot make decisions on half information. So whenever there are two sides to the story, you hear both sides of the story. Avoid giving judgments based on just one side of the story, because one person comes and tells you something. There's always another side of the story. Listen to both sides and then make the tough calls. Try to make bridges first. If the bridges don't work and you have to make a call, make a call. And lastly, seek support and resources. You're not the first person being a manager, right? You're not going to be the last person being a manager. There are lots of people who have come before you. Reach out and seek guidance. Just by showing up to this and by watching this recording, you have taken the first step. So if you can reach out to people, ask for guidance, then you would do a lot better. I, for example, used to reach out to my ex-managers and be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. How do I go about it? So I got the importance of quarterly strategic plans. How can I probably structure my team? How do I think about like multiple years out? There's a bunch of things. And this is where the friction that we're talking about. When you run into some friction, you can try to invent a solution on your own, or you can reach out to people, or you can go read books. Like Gautham suggested a book. Gautham also has a book called Leading with Empathy. So go read that. Go read lots of books. Because the analogy that I like to give people is think like you're trying to make a gourmet meal, but you only have ketchup and mustard in the pantry. You're not going to be able to make a very good meal. So you need to first bring all the ingredients, bring them in, think about it, and then you can go make those meals. Being a manager is very different from being an individual contributor because all of these soft skills come into play. So that is my spiel. So do we have any questions?
I think Pablo had an interesting question out there.
Yeah, Pablo had a...
Yeah, it was... how can we make sure alignment on goals does not suffer when the team keeps receiving high priority and time consuming requests that were not initially in the plan? So unplanned work, everything is top priority.
Everything is P0.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the team needs to reach those goals. So like it's like the classic squeaky wheel, and especially when something is of near and dear to a high ranking person, then automatically it becomes a priority one issue. So yeah, what are your takes on this?
So my take on this is we all have finite amount of time, right? And we need very clear focus on what we're doing and why we're doing it. So setting those clear goals of what are we trying to achieve and why are we trying to do this gives you a way by which you can triage incoming work. If it's helping you move towards your goal and it is truly, truly important, then you take it on. If it's not really helping with your current goals, push it out into the next quarter and acknowledge it and be like, yeah, this is important, kind of aligns, but isn't meeting the priority list, so that goes into the next quarter. Because you have to realize we only have a finite time. If you do something, you need to understand what are you not doing and have that conversation when new high priority work comes in, because it's not about going from 8-hour days to 12-hour days. Like that's not the answer over here, because there'll always be more work than time available. You have to be ruthless in your prioritization. And as a manager, it's your job to defend the team from additional work. So I used to try to defend a lot, but then as a manager, it's also my job to push the team to get more work done. So I will ask the team, but when I coach the team, I give them the same feedback. I'm like, come back and ask me if you think that this is not high enough priority, why are we doing this? Or if you agree this is high enough priority, let's negotiate on what else will not happen. Because you just can't do twice the amount of work in half the time, unless you can apply some of the other techniques, which I'm a huge fan of, by doing the most minimal amount of work to see if this is working or not. So the bunch of productivity techniques, this assumes you're fully productive, everything is great, there's no room to take on other things. You have to negotiate what drops off. You can't do it all.
So Pablo, I'll and the rest of the group, I'll draw your attention to a couple of things that Aakash said, which I think is, if you level it up, becomes, considering we're talking about a transition from IC to manager, I think the key thread that he was pulling on is communication, right? You should be, one, have the ability to identify what you're going to communicate. And Pablo, to your question, there are alignment on goals. If you are just transitioning from an IC to a manager, one of the things that you will notice during that transition is that there is a tendency to make sure that you do the path that you feel is the right path, like the right path technologically speaking, which could be making sure that we are aligning on goals because some other platform needs to be deprecated. These issues, production issues that you talk of, are cropping up because we have not solved the tech debt and so on and so forth. Now, if you take the transition, I think what Aakash was alluding to is, if you're able to build a communication outwardly to the stakeholders, to the focus points where the work is coming in from, or the production issues that you're being hit, is to say that we are in fact needing to establish a clear engagement model. Like, are we taking a beating on our goals to make sure that the lesser ideal path to constantly support production is necessary for the business right now? If that is, then your responsibility becomes to communicate that outwardly to your stakeholders and inwardly back to your team, saying, hey, we are going to make this pivot. This is what we believe is the right thing. Does anyone have any ideas, suggestions? We want to make this. So that, I think, becomes an important aspect in the transition. Like Aakash mentioned, there are several tools and frameworks to actually do the work and get it done and all of it, and how you can break the tasks apart. But to me, the most important thing that you can take away from that discussion is what are you going to focus on communicating outwardly, inwardly, with the team, across the team, and all of it, I think becomes the key thing to note.
I'll add a couple of things to what both of you have so well described. WIP limit, or the work in progress limit, is really important when you're a manager. So you need to make sure that you are taking real life activities and incidents into factor. It's not like you can schedule 36 or 40 hours of your team's work every week and then hope that there's not going to be any incidents if your organization does have incidents. So that is something you do need to factor in. Depending upon how regular or how infrequent your incidents or production issues or these unplanned works come in, you might want to reduce the projections or estimation of your team's work in progress limit to 70% of its utilization and leave the 30% for buffer. And if there are no incidents, that's when you work on continuous improvement or try to do any of those stretch goals. The other thing that I want to mention is, so incidents happen, but use them as learning opportunities and opportunities for improvement. Ask the team, brainstorm with them, and try to figure out how we can prevent these incidents from occurring or how we can prevent this from happening. It could be behavioral change. It could be a process change. It could be additional checks and balances that you can put in. But approach it in that way, saying, okay, we had this, we suffered a lot, let's go to the root cause of it. And then once you come to the root cause, and if it means going and talking to your peers or talking to other people, own it. But remember, you're building trust as well. Once you commit and say that you are going to go and try to resolve the problem, you have to work towards resolving it and not just making it as a task on your backlog and you're not getting to it. So just recognize those things. Those are some things that I would highly encourage. Is every time we have incidents, those are opportunities to actually better and improve upon it. But don't do the thing that I did where you just do like 80% of the time you're doing continuous improvement. That's not going to help. Do one or two things every cycle if possible.
We have another question, looks like from Tomas. Can you comment on an issue situation when someone is promoted from engineering to managerial and not feeling good in the new role, people facing, struggle with new human challenges in exchange for fun engineering activities?
Yeah.
Who would like to jump in?
Yeah, I can kick it off. This is a classic Microsoft problem. I spent some time over there where if you were a good individual contributor, the assumption was you would also be a good people manager and you will enjoy it. That's not always true. So what I've generally figured out is when someone is, at least on my team, is looking to go from an individual contributor to manager, we always have a very frank discussion of how things would be and how they would change for them. Because a lot of people assume that going into management is the only path for success. That is not true. Almost every company nowadays has path, both on the IC path and the manager path, which go on for a long time. So if you're unsure and you want to go try people management, have a chat with your manager and be like, this is something I'm going to try for the next 6 months to 1 year to see if I actually enjoy it. And this is something which is exciting to me. And if I do, I would like to continue with it. But I want to set the expectations straight with you right now. But there are also cases where you might not be asked, and then suddenly there's a reorg and you find yourself as a people manager and you're like, what just happened over here, right? Doesn't happen all the time, but does happen. In those cases, again, if you have done this, similar to what Gautham was saying, introspect, retrospect, and see if this is truly what you want to do. Our lives are too short, our careers are too short for like dealing with stuff that we don't want to do and do not enjoy doing. So if you find yourself losing interest and you find yourself like misaligned with the purpose of the goals of a people manager, you clearly have a conversation with your manager and they'll be more than happy for you to either increase your IC portion also so you can have fun while also being a manager, or have a timeline for you to transition back into people management, because they would much rather have you be with the company than leave the company and go find an IC job. Right? So always remember, you can always have these conversations. No one can force you to go do something, either be an IC or be a manager. It is your career to manage, but have these conversations. So there's always try before you buy is a great way of doing this thing, which I have also done in my previous jobs where there were people who had the desire to become a people manager. There's always a try before you buy period to go like, do this for a couple of quarters, see how it goes. And if they do a good job, then make it more permanent.
Yeah.
To your question on a specific issue or a situation, I can share a situation where someone did get moved. And to me, what I found is oftentimes when you look at the equation, that kind of the equation that Aakash talked about, where someone is just not cutting it in the people management role. This is less about us in the transition stage. This is maybe more of us being manager of managers at this point. But what I will say is it becomes important to focus on what was the circumstances for such person to take up the role. For example, you asked a specific example. There was one circumstance where there was a massive restructuring in the team. There was a need for us to be a little bit more organized in how we attack pockets of problems. So it ended up that the strongest member of the team was de facto named the people manager. Now, there was a little bit of both happening where the person was looking to do something different. There was a need. Person was not fully ready, the need was not fully baked, so they were like, okay, let's just solve the problem, let's go, right? Because oftentimes in business and in work, you have to make a decision and move forward and then react later. It was one of those situations. So what ended up happening was there was all the bad habits that we talked about, overly getting into the nuances, into the weeds, trying to take control of the entire situation, acting as an individual contributor while taking on the mantle of a manager. All of those bad habits started exhibiting itself after maybe 6 to 8 months, where things had settled down from a larger organizational reorg perspective. At that point in time, the discussion, at least I remember having, was, hey, the situation leading up to it was maybe it was accidental. It was the right person, right role, right moment in time. Let's level set. Let's reset. Let's level set right now. What do you believe your career ambitions are? And for this, I think a little bit of company support is necessary, like Aakash was saying. There needs to be a clear career path in IC and a clear career path in managerial. So having that pointed conversation to say, hey, we are here. We are here to make it work. This is what is not working. We see that the team, is not performing in a certain way. There are in bigger companies and other established companies, there are more metrics around, your team health and all of it, which is showing up as reasons why it is not working. Do you have an assessment of why that is? If the answer is yes, I do. I don't think this is the right role for me. I was having more fun in engineering. Your decision becomes a little easier. They're like, okay, let's undo this because we now are in a position where we can look at just you, not the whole organization. In this case, the situation was not that. This is, no, I really want to be in this role. I feel this is the right thing to do. I don't know why this is happening. I will go figure out. So that becomes a coaching moment for me where I said, no, it's not you figuring out. Let's figure out as an organization. Ask your team what is needing, what is not happening. So in that moment, the example that I would share is we ended up almost having an open discussion with the team. Hey, we stumbled into this situation where this person was elevated. This person wants to do better. How can we help them? What can we do? So I would say the takeaway story from that is being vulnerable and openness to vulnerability is a strength, and it is definitely not a weakness, right? Face it, deal with it. Once you're able to face it and openly acknowledge that, hey, we are in this spot, magical things can happen. The team comes around you, they actually empathize with you. From being adversarial, they actually become, oh, I feel sorry for this person. Now you understand the context. So I think your question is a relevant one, but I would start with what led to that point, right? So that you can get some context.
Oh, super. You just mentioned so many words that I love. You talked about empathy, you talked about talking, transparency, vulnerability. Creating that psychological safety is really important. One of the things, and this is more on the personal side, let's say that as the person who has gone into the role and is currently struggling on whether they truly made a decision, the right decision of being a manager or not, one of the things I tell my mentees is why don't you make a list of pros and cons? Like, let's break it down and write why you feel that you're being uncomfortable in whatever the situation is, and what do you think your strengths are that can help you come out of it. So when you do a pros and cons exercise, and then you think about the strengths that you're bringing to the table and how you can improve upon things, whether you can approach things in a different way, you are much more collaborative. And being a manager is hard, especially if you're an introvert and then you're pushed into a managerial role. And so overcoming those limiting beliefs is some things that you have to work upon. But just putting it on paper and then analyzing it, or working with the team member, like Subbu mentioned, when he's manager of manager, he works with the managers and tries to coach and have teachable moments. Those are some things that would really help. At the end of the day, you're dealing with people. They're non-deterministic, non-discrete. And you are going to have really messy situations, but they're going to be beautiful, messy situations. And you will learn and you will grow a lot out of them.
Awesome. Those are some great answers. Thank you, Subbu and Gautam. We're close to wrapping up today's session. So I want to remind everyone that you can go to this link over here, and then you can go download the free cheat sheet. Do go ahead and please subscribe to the channel. This is where the recording would be uploaded, youtube.com/@AakashMandhar. And if you feel like, please do go ahead and subscribe to my weekly newsletter, where I'll be sharing lots of different tips and tricks to help you with your career. So in conclusion, I just wanted to say, I wanted to leave you with a few thoughts. First, it's important to remember that the transition from IC to manager is not easy, and there'll be challenges along the way. But it's also an incredibly rewarding journey that can help you grow and develop as a leader. Second, building a strong foundation as an IC is crucial to your success as a manager. This includes developing your skills, building relationships, gaining credibility within your organization. Finally, effective management is all about building and leading a team that is motivated, productive, and aligned with your vision. This requires good communication, as again Subbu had alluded to, dedication, and the ability to handle conflicts and make tough decisions. We hope that today's discussion has provided you with some valuable insights and tools to help you navigate this transition successfully. Before we wrap up, any final words, Gautam and Subbu?
It was definitely a bunch of comments made me reflect on experiences, both good and bad, and definitely got to learn something myself today. So appreciate Aakash and Gautam for sharing openly.
Thank you. I love this conversation, and we are all very passionate about it, and we can talk about a lot of things. The one thing that I will say, and I'll leave you all with this to reflect on, is don't use your one-on-ones as status updates. Your one-on-ones as a manager is supposed to be to improve the person that you're having the one-on-one with. Have do the Pareto principle. Like 20% of the time, you're going to give kudos, appreciation, feedback, any of the things to the individual that you're having the one-on-one with. And the remaining 80% of the time has to be to develop the individual and helping them achieve their goals. The one-on-one should never be about your status. And that's something that I've seen in many places people resort to. Talk about the person, don't talk about the work. That's all I had for this.
Awesome, Gautam. So, parting words. Please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. Reach out to us and send us messages. We'd be more than happy to help you with your journey if you're looking to transition, or if you need some help with someone else transitioning into this role. And thank you so much, everyone, for the gift of your time. And we hope to see you in the next event.